Hi, everyone. Welcome to CORT 2023, the third annual Conference on Religious Trauma. I'm your host, registered professional counselor and religious recovery consultant, Janice Selby. With religion-driven tensions rising around the world, we can clearly see that every religion comes with the potential for causing trauma. During this conference, my thoughts will never be far from those caught in the devastating religious conflicts enveloping the Middle East right now. When I lost my faith about 13 years ago, it came as a huge shock. I never imagined myself not believing what I had been raised to cherish as important, reliable, irrefutable truths. I lost my community, my identity, and my worldview, and it was definitely traumatizing. Many of you joining us today not only suffered the loss of a belief system, but also the harsh, abusive realities that can be part of growing up in fundamentalist homes and communities. The phrase religious trauma syndrome, coined by my friend Dr. Marlene Winnell, acknowledges those many losses. With all the information and stories we're going to be absorbing this weekend about religious trauma and recovery, I encourage you to take responsibility for your own self-care. Since all sessions are being recorded, you can step away if you're feeling triggered. Whatever practice grounds you and brings you back to a sense of safety in the present moment, please take the time to do so, knowing that you can catch up on anything you might have missed by watching the recording. When I first began putting CORT together in 2019, the plan was for us all to meet in person in Vancouver at CORT 2020, but COVID had other plans. Here we are at CORT 2023, and even though we're meeting digitally rather than in person, we still need to consider safety. The Conference on Religious Trauma is committed to safer spaces online, and this means that racism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, or harassment of any kind, including religious proselytizing, will not be tolerated either in the sessions or in the chat. If at any time you experience such harassment or would like to make any comments regarding safer spaces at the Conference on Religious Trauma, please send me a private message or email me directly at janice.selby@gmail.com. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that I am joining you from the unceded territory of the Seal people in the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia, Canada. There's a good chance that most of us are actually joining today from traditional lands and territories. And if you want to learn more about traditional lands around the world, you can visit native-land.ca. Okay, we're getting closer and closer. I want to talk to you just for a moment about sponsorship, because putting on an event this size requires time, energy, and funding. Sponsorships allow me to offer student discounts and generous partial scholarships without which many people could not attend CORT. Learn more about sponsors in our CORT exhibit hall. I'm very grateful to our returning CORT sponsors, including psychologist Dr. Coco Owen, who specializes in recovery from religious trauma. And Recovering from Religion is another faithful CORT sponsor. This weekend, we have RFR founder Dr. Daryl Ray closing out our conference. And this year, I'm happy to offer each of you my Divorcing Religion workbook as a thank you for supporting CORT. You can download it at my exhibit booth. I am excited to welcome 2 new sponsors this year. Healing Arts Here with Nina Rain, offering mobile trauma-informed workshops, retreats, classes, and kids camps. And Dr. Tamara MC, who is facilitating our child marriage panel on Sunday morning. Dr. Tamara is a cult, child marriage, human trafficking, and polygamy lived experience expert. Please support our sponsors and all of our other exhibitors by joining us in the virtual CORT exhibit hall throughout this weekend. Okay, thank you. You've all been patient, and I'm delighted to see so many of you here. It's time already for our very first speaker at CORT 2023. And I'm talking about Dr. Josie McSkimming, who's joining us from Australia. Dr. McSkimming is a clinical social worker with over 35 years of experience. In addition to her private counseling practice and providing clinical supervision, Josie is an adjunct lecturer at the University of New South Wales. Josie is also a previous long-term insider of the Sydney Anglican Church, and her book is titled Leaving Christian Fundamentalism and the Reconstruction of Identity. While many of us are familiar with the deconstruction process of leaving religion, tonight Dr. McSkimming is going to talk to us about reconstruction after deconstruction. Welcome, Josie. It's lovely to see you again.
Thank you. It is so lovely to be here. No, it's great. And how lovely to be the first cab off the rank from the Antipodes. I don't know if there's anybody else here from the Southern Hemisphere, but wouldn't that be terrific if there were? I would like to start by saying that I'm on the land of the Bidjigal and Gadigal people of the wider Eora Nation. Again, unceded lands. I acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of this land and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Some people may be familiar with the fact that we just had a referendum here in Australia, which was unsuccessful in granting Indigenous people a voice to Parliament. So there is great lament among those of us who supported that particular referendum. And unfortunately, there was some very Trumpian politics played in that referendum. But let's not just start straight with politics. I am talking to you today about reconstruction after deconstruction, and I really want this to be a positive session, a strengths-based session. I don't want to be particularly pathologising and psychologising of people's experiences here today. I see reconstruction as a journey in reclaiming ethics and values and principles to live by, and that is the kind of the spirit in which I want to do this presentation. My approach is as a narrative therapist, and so my approach is to appreciate that the problem is the problem and the person is never the problem. And I'm understanding the problem in this case as not intrinsic or essentialised within any individual, but a problem that has been socially created. And my expertise is in Christian fundamentalism. I'm not an expert in other forms of religious fundamentalism, but my research and my interest has been in Christian fundamentalism. I have lived experience of more than 35 years in the Christian church or the Sydney Anglican diocese, very evangelical fundamentalist church. I didn't grow up in a particularly Christian family. My father is Jewish. My mother grew up in the Methodist church. We had a sort of a nominal, progressive kind of Christian upbringing. So I regard that as a bit of a bonus, actually, that I didn't have it, the total inculcation didn't start to happen from straight, the moment I was born. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen now and start with some slides. And I'm suggesting that you, by all means, have questions, and I'll try and answer them at the end. I don't want to go on for too long. I have included, I hope, quite a lot of material from the people I work with, because I really think that's just such an important part of any form of presentation, to allow the people who I work with, who consult with me about their religious trauma, to really be front and centre of this presentation. So I have specifically asked various people what they want to contribute, and I'll be reading out their contributions, and they know that's happening and they're interested in feedback too. So I will share my screen and hope we don't have any problems. Okay. Right. Okay. So that all seems okay. Okay. So here are my details for those who are interested in just recording these things. My website, my email. I'm always very happy to hear from people. My absolute joy is hearing from people from all around the world with their particular experience. My approach is all about stories, and the story that we have when we have grown up or been thoroughly immersed in religious communities is a story that we are actually trying to resist and change. Rebecca Solnit, the wonderful feminist writer, writes, "What's your story? It's all in the telling. Stories are compasses and architecture. We navigate by them. We build our sanctuaries and our prisons out of them." I'm understanding that for a lot of us, our religious life, our previous religious life, has been that kind of a prison. And it has shaped our sense of self, and the story that we have told about ourselves has been, well, in many cases, has been quite unrelentingly negative. Reconstruction of Identity. I love this quote from Jill Johnson, all the way back to 1973. Identity is what you can say you are according to what they say you can be. And for many of us, what they said you can be was very restricted. A certain type of woman, a certain type of man, a certain type of sexual identity, a certain type of being in the world that was restrictive and restricted other ways of being in the world. I'm understanding Reconstruction as quite different to this, that you actually are moving to a place where you are privileging your own ethics, your own values. I'm going to just go theoretical for a minute, and I hope this will be useful, because this really shapes my approach, and I think this is so helpful in Reconstruction, to be more post-structuralist in the way we think about identity and ourselves. Post-structuralist thought is not oriented around the idea of a deep structure to anything. It means that meanings lie between people rather than within or behind a person. Most significantly, identity is a public and social achievement negotiated within social institutions and within communities of people. It's shaped by historical and cultural forces. And in counselling, I'm encouraging the deconstruction of people's negative truths about identity. In other words, I don't want people to see their identity as some kind of essentialised within them, to think that they, deep within them, have a sense of badness, or that their self-blame is related to something inherently individualistic. To understand that their sense of themselves has been created and been negotiated within a community of people, and in this case, within a particular religious community. I think that can be such a helpful structure, such a helpful theoretical frame when we're actually thinking about Reconstruction. So what we are thinking about is more of a constitutionalist perspective. It's not intrapsychic, it's not psychologized, it's not individualized. It presents options for people to become other than who they were, rather than more truly who they really are. This is such an important distinction, because in my work, I talk to lots of people who feel as though they have no authentic self, that they have been so thoroughly immersed and inculcated in various beliefs, discourses, truths, propaganda, theologies, that they don't know who they really are. And rather than me trying to help them find an authentic self, which is more of a kind of an intrinsic question, I find it more helpful to move to language of the preferred self, because it opens up more options, particularly when exiting high demand groups. So, in other words, this kind of thinking has more in common with a scaffold metaphor than an onion metaphor. So an onion metaphor is traditional psychotherapy, where you peel away the onion and you get to the kernel or to the center of who somebody really is. I'm not saying this doesn't help some people, but I find it more helpful to have more of a scaffold metaphor, as in the scaffold up a building, in that I build levels with people so that they can actually become more who they want to be, rather than who they really are. They can actually move up that building through a scaffolding conversation so that they can find themselves other than who they are. I just find that this is a bit of a relief for people who particularly struggle with this notion of the authentic self. And again, for some people it's not problematic, but I do find that for some people it really is. They feel quite vexed by that one. If anybody's familiar with my work, and I don't expect anybody to be, let me just reiterate a little bit about what I understand as a particular practice of power that happens within religious communities. This is a picture of the modern prison, which was devised by Jeremy Bentham, 18th century philosopher, social reformer. And it was seen that a prison like this was going to be transformative. It was going to reduce cruelty and the horrors of prison life, in that you've got a central observation tower that can see everybody at all times and in all places. People can't see each other, and they don't know whether they're being seen at any time. They could be being seen at all times. So they learn to regulate their own behaviour. So they become more self-regulatory rather than needing torture, whipping, stocks, humiliation, cruelty, various sort of forms of torture. And this was called the Panopticon. And this is something that I guess I have used this metaphor to, in my work, to understand how things work in church communities. When I am doing deconstruction and reconstruction with people, it's never linear. It's never that you deconstruct, then you reconstruct. But what I understand deconstruction to be is helping people to understand the practices of power, the practices and politics of power. And in these Christian communities, the idea that people could be engaged in something similar to a panoptic process is something that I find very useful in my work, and people found very useful. The idea that people could be subject to a gaze at all times and in all places. They don't know kind of when and where it might be, so they engage in very high-level self-surveillance, which leads to huge amounts of anxiety, guilt, fear, humiliation, and shame. I borrowed this idea from Michel Foucault, and many people will recognise it. And I have said that this apparatus of power could be termed the Christian normalising gaze, which potentially leads to the rise of the Christian norm, where people maintain surveillance over their own lives and the source of power is not visible. So in my work with people, I'm trying to help them to understand how they may have experienced such practices of power, how they may have been invited into a sense of self-surveillance, how that works in church communities, who's involved in it, what are the things that are taught, what are the groups, what are the things that may occur within communities that would invite people into a sense of self-surveillance of a fairly chronic and continuous way. And again, what Michel Foucault says, which reiterates what I said earlier, which I love this quote, it's probably the heart of my work. Maybe the target nowadays is not to discover what we are, but to refuse what we are. So in other words, when people unmask and unveil the way power and the practices of power and control have been exercised in their life, then we can have refusal. Then we don't need to know anything more, but that we can resist. Because when there is power, there is always resistance. So what I'd like to say is, again, deconstruction and reconstruction happen together. It's not a linear process. So what I try and do is I try and stay at the pace of the people I'm working with, my client who's with me. How has this person experienced the practice and processes of power? How have they worked in their life? And of course, this is accompanying somebody on a journey. And I have my own experience. I have my own thoughts. I have my own terrible as well as mundane and banal encounters with power over many, many years in churches. And so I have to be careful that I don't eclipse people's journeys by imposing my own. So what I find really helpful with people in this process of understanding power is to explore those multiple sites of injury, which is, I call them, but carefully. These sites of injuries can include, and this is not an exhaustive list, ostracising, bullying, shaming, policing, faux counselling, excluding, gaslighting, which all can occur in small groups. It can occur in a more authoritarian way from sermons and lectures, and it can occur at sort of the micro level between individuals, because what I understand happens in religious communities, particularly in the one that I've studied, is that you are the recipient of power, but you also become the vehicle of power. So we as individuals experience the control, the surveillance, which invites self-surveillance from others, but we can also engage with it with others. We are policing others' behaviours too. And this is the quite confronting aspect, I think, that people realise about how power works within communities. Sometimes it's less authoritarian and more dispersed. It's more scattered throughout the church community. We all are engaged in it. Where am I up to? Look, let me talk about a man I'm working with in his 40s by the name of Jim. This is all, of course, de-identified information. Oh, no, actually, before I do, I'm just going to mention this, that when we are talking about practices of power, and I said this before, a key consideration is that the response is just as important as the effects. In other words, people have tremendously negative effects, not all bad. I accept that there are reasonably positive legacies from Christian lives, but there are tremendous traumatic and difficult effects. But my interest is not just in the effects, but in people's response to these sites of injury, to these moments where they have experienced power. And resistance and protest may be subtle, but point towards a new way of being. And I'm very interested in the way how we protest. If anybody's familiar with the work of Michael White, he wrote that people are always taking steps in endeavouring to prevent the trauma they are subject to or modify it in some way, modify its effects on their lives. These steps contribute to the preservation of and are founded upon what people hold precious. Even in the face of overwhelming trauma, people take steps to protect and to preserve what they give value to. I think this is incredibly important, that even in the face of overwhelming trauma, people take steps to try to protect and preserve what they give value to. And let me now mention Rob. One thing that I have wondered about and written about in my own work is that when people experience power and when people respond to trauma to try and protect and preserve what they give value to, for a lot of people, a double life starts to form. It's certainly happened in my life like this. It's below the surface. You don't even know it's growing there. There is something bubbling underneath, something subterranean that is resisting the encounters that you're engaged in. When you are the recipient of these sites of injury, but even when you are the perpetrator of an injury to somebody else, something is happening underneath the surface where you are experiencing some kind of discomfort and are trying to preserve what you give value to. And I think it's through the double life that people can start to reconstruct. So in Jim's case, his double life started when he started to read alternative literature. He tried to discuss the ideas with fellow Christians. Then he chose non-Christians to try these new ideas. In his deconstruction, as often happens, came the deconstruction or the incredible difficulties within his own marriage. He left the family home for a period of time. He was wretched with grief, with sorrow. But what became apparent is his increasing awareness of the trauma of his fundamentalist James Dobson family life, how wrong it was, punishment with the belt, the justification of corporal punishment from a Christian sense. And probably most significant or equally significant was his awareness of what he had said to his very good gay friend at university about his life being unacceptable to God. And this was huge for him as a young man in his early 20s in the forming of the double life, because of his shame and distress of what he said to his friend, because he knew as the perpetrator of that injury that he was resisting it. He knew that it wasn't right. He knew that. But it takes many, many years, dare I say, for that ship that's on the bottom of the ocean of our lives to rise to the surface, and for the double life to kind of break through, and for you to experience an immersion or an embracing of your double life. What happened has been happening to Jim, which has been really extraordinary, and I'm just looking for what he wrote, is that he has been remaking his ethical substance. The questions he's asking himself now is, what matters to me and what do I stand for? What matters to me and what do I stand for? Now, some people listening to this will be thinking, is this power, threat, meaning framework? Because that's another way of understanding what I'm talking about. If you're familiar with PTMF, power, threat, meaning framework, we're very interested in asking questions about what happened to you, how did it affect you, how did you make sense of what happened, what did you do to survive, and what strengths and access to power do you have? It's a kind of, they're not the same, but there is a commonality, very positive ways of understanding trauma. I think, as I said, that the double life can be the foundation for a reinvigorated sense of self. Refusal of the self-surveillance and panoptic experience to church life. Now, this may start internally. There may be tears, there may be just turning your head away. See, I'm trying to emphasize the subtlety of the resistance. You might lower your eyes in church as you just become aware of something. There may be stronger effects like dissociation, a fantasy world, remaining silent, eternal alternative reading. All of these can happen before somebody says, no, I disagree with that. No, I see something differently. There's a great subtlety in our refusal. And I think it's really helpful to work with people about the subtleties of their refusals because they can realise how long they have been refusing. Then there's a repositioning in regard to what was considered truth and acceptable. And there is a self-seeing and a privileging of one's own experience. So less being seen and more doing the looking. We reverse the panoptic gaze. We look out. We refuse the self-surveillance and say no more. And there is an uncoupling from the Christian project and a reforming of an ethical substance. Let me tell you what Jim said. Coming from a fundamentalist background where it was important to have the right answers, it took me a while to feel comfortable with having questions for which there seemed to be no definitive answers with our present state of knowledge. Once that state is accepted, I began to realise that the human journey is more about exploration and playing with ideas. Nonetheless, for me, some sort of framework is emerging, a kind of tentative network of boundaries based on current scientific knowledge, within which exploration is sometimes fertile, sometimes speculative, but cradled within an endeavour that one of exciting discovery rather than fear of being on the wrong side of God of fundamentalist religion. I've learnt to be more comfortable with who I am as a person. I can enjoy something, music, nature, friendship, simply because it brings joy. I no longer have to feel guilty for not being devoted solely to the Lord's work. I no longer have to carry that heavy burden of people I know going to eternal torment when they die if they don't love Jesus. I have come to realise there are lots of ways of living a good human life. He then goes on to talk a lot about the way Reconstruction changes the nature of relationships with friends and family and the difficulties of that. But I think that gives you a flavour of what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that the pain that people have and the strong emotion that people have is testimony. Their distress is tribute. So people with crying with regret over what they have done or what they have not done points to what they hold most dear. And it points to their preferred ethical self. So pain is not just an inner state, but it's relational. It's not something to be got over. It's not something just a cathartic experience to be expressed. We don't just manage pain. I think our task is to explore what the pain is in relation to, because something important has been violated, ignored, ridiculed, trampled all over, disrespected, not supported. This is what happens with resistance. This is what happens with refusal. There is pain. There is huge pain. But the pain is testimony, and the pain is a pointer. The pain is a flagpole. And within the shadow of the pain, we have a flagpole. And in the shadow of the flagpole is what that pain is in relation to. And it helps me, and it helps others to, I think, discover your own ethics and what you hold most dear and what you most value in life and what are the principles you want to live with. And that is the positive aspect of Reconstruction. I see the heart of Reconstruction is that what a person despairs against points to what she hopes for. You've got a lovely, wonderful social worker in Canada called Vicki Reynolds, who you probably know, who's an activist too, and, writes some wonderful work about this very thing. And she also works with the therapist Alan Wade, engaged in what is known as response-based therapy, which is, again, kind of perhaps a cousin of the narrative therapy and of the power, threat, meaning framework style of therapy. What they all have in common is that we're interested in people's response to trauma. We're not just interested in the effects, because it does point to how people understand power. I'd like to also share with you something along these lines from another, I'm going to call him a young man. He's in his 40s because I think that's young, called Alistair. Again, that's not his real name. And this is what he wrote for you today. I came from a place where I was never enough, never reading the Bible enough, never praying enough, never giving enough money, never volunteering enough, never being still enough to hear God's voice, never trusting enough to feel God's peace, never being selfless enough, never repenting enough, never enough. I came from a place where self-care is selfishness, passions are idols, best efforts are filthy rags, sexuality is shameful, ambition is prideful, abuse is minimised, opinions are disregarded, doubts are dismissed. When I stopped, I realised that I could tear myself apart and offer it piece by piece to the church until there was nothing left and it would never be enough. I chose a new path. Where I am enough, where I can accept my imperfections, where I can love myself and others without judgment, where what matters to me is valuable, where I can be open to new and better things. I am finding it difficult to navigate this new path because of what has come before. I'm finding it hard to let go of the pain and burden of church and high control religion. But stepping away and walking this new path is worth it. Step by step, day by day, things will get better. Again, he is asking those questions. What matters to me and what do I stand for? Once he has unmasked, unveiled those practices, those experiences of power and control that have caused him so much pain, so much suffering. He's quite early on in this process. As many of you will know, he hasn't been to church for about a year. The last time I went to church was in 2005. One of my clients said to me, how do I get over anger? Are you still angry? And I said, I'm angry every day of my life. I don't see my anger as anything to get over. Not that I want to be reactive or cruel or unkind. I don't want reactive anger. But my anger points me to a new way of looking at the world. It's a new ethic where I see injustices and cruelty. And I'm reminded of what truly matters to me. It can fuel activism. So I don't try and get rid of my anger at all. And that too is a relief and refreshing. Reconstruction, I think, is an experience of freedom, of true freedom. Now, Christian freedom was promised to those of us who have that experience of being in the Christian fundamentalist church as acceptance and grace and escape from modernity. But ultimately, it was conditional on people fulfilling obligations to fulfill their prescribed roles. So Christian freedom was more associated with shame, control, yet confusingly, routinely justified by love. Reconstruction is perhaps an experience of being overwhelmed by one's own genuine freedom in that true existential sense, in its original meaning, from Sartre, from Nietzsche, from Kierkegaard. It's all about how can life become meaningful. And of course, that can be exciting and exhilarating, but also terrifying. And as Alistair said, it's difficult because of what has come before. We have a lot of bricks attached to our ankles, I feel, that kind of drag along with us. But it can be heady and exhilarating, the freedom. Here is the magnificent Grose Valley in Blue Mountains, west of Sydney. A lot of people will know that this was decimated and nearly destroyed by the bushfires of 2019. You in Canada know wildfires too. You know what they do. You know the heartbreak they cause us. But this forest is recovering. Please God, may it not have another fire within about the next 5 to 10 years. But it is recovering. And this was taken not long ago. And it's a very happy place for me. And it's a place where I can see regeneration and regrowth and just feel heartened that even something that looked so dreadful and so burnt and so destroyed can be okay. I'm going to just read a poem that was written by Kerry. I've only met Kerry twice, and she's had a lot of church trauma of a very extreme nature. And I'm just going to read her short poem. You say it's a love gone wrong, but she is the chorus to the verses to my life song. You say our love isn't right, but she let my heart beat again and breathe me back to life. You say our love should not exist, but she sets me on fire with every sweet, passionate kiss. You say I should have just remained alone, but I could not help but run into her loving arms because my heart finally found its home. You say I'm not what I should be and God would not agree, but her love feels safe, secure, and completely normal to me. You say, but I had to get to the place where the words do not affect me anymore. I say, I found a love that is so right, the kind of love all my life I've been searching for. So those final words are from Kerry. And I'm going to, how long have I been going? Been going about 35 minutes. That's probably enough for now. I'm going to stop the screen share. And can you see me all right now, Janice? It's all good? Okay. So I hope there's some questions for me, which I'm very happy to answer.
That was such a great talk. Thank you very much. I just really appreciated how thoughtful it was. And one thing it really made me consider was the significant need for us in our reconstruction to do some sort of values clarification, whether they are specific values clarification exercises, whether we're going to go through a sheet and take a look at values. And when I've done it myself, sometimes I've considered, well, these would have been my previous values. These would have been number one, high up on my list, say maybe obedience. And now, 13 years later, boy, obedience doesn't even get on there. Autonomy tops out my list.
I was never good at obedience.
That's very good. I tried really, really hard, but I guess
got
in the end I wasn't.
I got big talkings to about not being obedient and not being my quiet and gentle spirit, not being quiet and gentle enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right.
That's that's the main reason why I started wearing a head covering when I was a Christian, because I thought my marriage was so difficult. I thought it must be me. It can't be him. It can't be my God-given head.
No,
it must
of course
be
not.
me. So I decided I would start wearing this piece of cloth on my head as a visual reminder to myself to zip it. I wasn't very good at that, but I did try it for a number of years. But yeah, just that feeling of failure, like I'm never enough. No matter what I do, it's not enough. Like you read
I know. I just, I had one of my, how in very evangelical circles we all got married at sort of 12 or something. I was engaged at 19. I wasn't married, but I was in one of those pretend counselling sessions. It wasn't proper counselling, where I was spoken to about that I was so dominating and so loud and so bossy, that word, and that what I needed to do now was reflect on the fruit of the Spirit on a daily basis, and each day reflect on one fruit of the Spirit and think about it all day. No word to the male partner, just me and my lack of quiet and gentle spirit. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was cruel, actually, because this sort of thing it is so destructive of your sense of self when you're a young woman.
Yes.
It was many years to realise that was so wrong, that was bullying. Yeah.
Yes. And I just do want to mention that we will actually be having a panel on child marriage, because there are people even in the United States and in Canada, I'm sure in Australia too, who are married off as children, and that's a very serious topic. We'll be looking at, I think, on Sunday morning. But I wanted to mention also how much I appreciate that you are okay with being angry. Because people say, "Oh, those angry atheists," but to me, I feel like there's a reason that I have some anger, and it doesn't mean it's not self-immolating, all-consuming.
Absolutely,
it spurs me to look for change and see how what can I do to help make things better. So I thought that was just very great and encouraging for you to say that you don't mind anger.
I'm very, and I think clients are also, or people who consult with us, are very relieved to hear that their anger can be useful to them. That anger doesn't have to be a sort of, immolating others or self-immolating. It can be something that can point, it can actually fire them in a way that is positive, which is helpful, which is going to take them to a new place that they want to go. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another thing that I grappled with that I'm curious to know what your thoughts on it are, initially related to the concept of forgiveness. I felt like something was wrong with me if I couldn't forgive. And now with some of my clients, I tell them forgiveness is the F word. We actually want to work on acceptance. We want to be able to radically accept what is in front of us today. So yes, someone did something terrible to us, or maybe we even did the thing that was terrible. And so we have to, in order to be able to move forward, get to a place of accepting it. But forgiveness is so often weaponized by abusers and predators within the church.
It sure is. And people, perhaps friends, well-meaning friends and family members say, well, you've got to forgive and you've got to move on. There can be these rather casual, unhelpful remarks. And yes, in fact, forgiveness may not be at all a place where somebody wants to go, and it may not, this is what I mean too about staying decentered too, as somebody who's working with somebody, that you don't catapult them to places that other people want to catapult them. I mean, I know there are therapists that work towards helping to forgive people who've abused you. I don't do that at all. Again, I try and talk about acceptance and understanding, and mostly unraveling and deconstructing and unmasking what has happened so that you can reach acceptance, so you can actually say, this happened. Mm-hmm. And I know it's very hard to actually think about yourself doing really awful things to other people, but all of us, I mean, I regret, it's a funny word, I have regrets. I have conversations and things I said to people that I can't believe I said and did. But that was part and parcel of that journey. Mm-hmm. I don't know if self-forgiveness is the piece of the identity I would embrace, mm-hmm. but an acknowledgement and acceptance is I find that more preferable.
Yes, very. We just actually had someone send us in a note here. In one of the slides, Dr. McSkimming had the term tribute as related to distress. Mm-hmm. She didn't explain that part of the concept as it related to the pain and trauma, and I'm not sure I understand that notion. Do you remember that slide, or can you talk about that?
I do. And look, thanks for that. Look, I think tribute is, I don't want this to have a religious sort of concept, but your tribute can be like a kind of an offering, and your distress is as important and is not to be kind of despised or something to be done away with. I mean, I know this is to get away from this idea that all we do is process distress or have some kind of cathartic abreaction around distress or pain. Whereas I'm trying to understand that distress may be a tribute, again, to something that you don't yet know about yourself. It might be a form of tribute to some kind of value or principle, some self-acknowledgement that you are not yet familiar with in terms of yourself, in terms of perhaps the double life of the submerged self. If you want to read a little bit more about this, whoever asked that question, there is quite a lot written on this. It does become a little theoretical, but if you are somebody who loves that, it's called the absent but implicit concept, that something is absent, doesn't seem to be there, but it's implicit. So the distress may be present, but what might be absent but implicit is what that distress points to, which might be some kind of tribute or some kind of offering or some kind of acknowledgement of the self. I don't know. I hope that answers it. But I can refer that person to readings within the narrative literature around that.
Thank you. And we do have another comment as well from Elise. And thank you for sharing this wisdom, Josie. Could you share an example of what you despair against points to what you hope for? What might that look like?
Oh, yeah. Well, I suppose even just with the three people who contributed to this, I can talk about myself or I can talk about them, but I despair against, I despair when people tell me stories of subtle and not subtle abuses that have occurred in their church. I absolutely despair when I hear about the micro injuries or the massive macro injuries that have occurred within people's church experiences. And I suppose that despair points to what I hope for, that for this person, there may be recovery. or even that we can fight against communities that condone and minimise this sort of stuff. I despaired when Christian people in this latest referendum that we had in Australia, I despaired when Christian people used their platform to say that to give Indigenous people would be divisive in our community, when all they're asking for is a voice in issues that concern them, not even the wider community. And to weaponise this referendum to kind of stoke the fires of racism. So I was so in despair about the Christians using platforms to stoke racism, oh so subtly, and not so subtly either, I might add. And that points to what I hope for, that we can actually resist racism in all its forms. I could just give so many examples of what I despair about. Despair is close to anger, and anger is close to hope. Because as we speak and as we attend these conferences and speak together, we know there are others who are going, I will not tolerate that. I will speak out. I have hope for better ways of being. I'm not just, the Christians who won't speak out against racism, about homophobia. They won't speak out, who won't speak up about that we're killing the planet that we're on. How can that be any sort of useful Christian frame? But then there are those within Christian churches, on the periphery of them and outside of them, who are. So that gives me hope too. Does that answer that question?
I think it really does. That was very good. You gave some powerful examples there. And anger is close to hope. That's interesting. I really like it.
Well, I think it is. Because if we, Vicki Reynolds, who I spoke about earlier, says in one of her articles that in her kind of research, she discovered or sort of wondered if attending one rally to do with social action or social change, when the people she surveyed, it was worth 10 counselling sessions. So this is another thing that I actually suggest to people, so that when people are despairing about what they've been through, or the state of the world, or the state of the church, they can't become involved in social action and social reform. When we had a plebiscite here for same-sex marriage a few years ago, and huge rallies for the vote for same-sex partnerships, some of my ex-Christian clients said they cried at those rallies. They cried with joy. So there was despair at what they'd been through as part of the LGBTQ community, despair of all those wasted years in that dead zone. But there was hope. One said to me, I've never felt such love from the church as I felt in that rally. So that's interesting. So I really do encourage social action, social change, because I think that hope mitigates despair.
Yes, and it helps us feel more empowered.
Definitely.
We actually can do something, and at times we must do something, and it's not only then potentially helpful and healing for society at large, but for us as individuals too.
Hope so.
That's such a great idea. I don't know if we have any more questions. No, I think that's it for now. If you had any comments or thoughts you wanted to leave us with, Josie, now.
Well, I do. I had some good news in that I am having another book published. So that's
Yay!
good.
Yes.
This one I hope might come out next year, but these things are slow. And my previous book was sort of a research and an academic book, but this is more of a memoir. And it's about my family and my Christian life and my life with my sister who was gay, who died. And the terrible disruption in our relationship because of my Christian life and because of our own family trauma and how that worked out over the years. So that hopefully people might find interesting, because it's all about sisters, it's all about family trauma, and it's all about how religious trauma can so disrupt relationships.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a name for it by any chance?
Well, its name is, now this is very Australian, you'll have to think about this.
Okay.
Memory is a nesting magpie.
Memory
and that
is a
comes from
nesting
one of my
magpie.
sister's poems, because she was quite a well-known writer. Because magpies in this country are very fierce when they nest, and they dive for your eyes. So that's what memory is like. It dives for your eyes.
That is so powerful. Oh boy.
Yeah.
And so you're hoping
So
that
for Australians, we have signs everywhere saying, beware swooping magpies.
oh my gosh, wear your safety goggles, people.
Yeah, they do. People do. Because they're very fierce when they're nesting. And memories can be like that. For church memories and all kinds of memories.
Right.
So, it's going to be a little while, but
I wondered if the poem
you
you read.
Details there, and I hope it might be of interest to everyone.
Yes, thank you. I just was curious if the poem that you read earlier was by your sister.
Which poem?
About the love that she
that went wrong. No, that's Carrie.
Oh, Carrie.
So
okay.
My sister was Dorothy Porter, and she published a lot of books, which are widely available. And no, her poems are really something. No, this is Darling Carey, who I have only met twice, and she's just a new person who's consulting with me about church trauma.
Okay. And you know what? Just now, actually, one question did come in. If we're not keeping you too long.
That's all right.
Paul said, if you were going to generalize from your experience in fundamentalist Christianity to other fundamentalist religions, how would you suggest going about that?
Well, look, I think fundamentalism in all of its forms is so dangerous and so destructive. And I'm not going to speak in any expertise about what is happening in the Middle East, because I'm not an expert on this. I'm from a Jewish background, but I'm also left-leaning, and I am absolutely on understanding and appreciate both sides of the argument. But dare I say, fundamentalism on both sides of this divide have been at least one of the significant and terrible aspects to this. And I kind of am horrified, and I despise fundamentalist religions in all their forms because of what they do to people, their exclusivity, the way people are in or out, and the hostility to those who are in as well as those who are out. I think that to understand the power, and to understand power as actually a whole system, a whole assemblage of practices and how it affects people, to even use the whole concept of the Panopticon, that actually is true of many fundamentalist religions. And I think that certainly with some fundamentalist people that I've worked with from other religions, it is a very similar process. So I think the deconstruction of the practices, the politics of power, how control is exercised, and also, of course, there's the whole question that there is, what distinguishes this from cults? How cultish is this? Because cults may have an additional assemblage, an additional system of many micro and macro kind of ways of controlling people. So I see them as quite applicable and quite generalisable even though I am talking about Christian fundamentalism, which does have some of its own unique ways of practicing on people, the idea that you can use truth, this is the truth, to batter people into submission, and that if you don't accept this as truth, then there will be consequences for you. That is very much a part of lots of fundamentalist religions. And I do talk about this a little bit in my book. And there are people who have researched this, as the person who asked the question probably knows. There are quite a lot of researchers into fundamentalist Abrahamic religions as well as others.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yes. Even my friend, even sort of fundamentalist Buddhism can cause problems for people. So I'm not just restricting it to the Abrahamic kind of the big three. There are other ways that you can, really interfere with people's sense of self, their sense of freedom in this world, their sense of being, their sense of self-acceptance.
Very well stated. And of course, in religion, we tend to call it fundamentalism. In politics and other spheres, we might refer to it as extremism or radicalism.
Absolutely.
Yes. And of course, also, our hearts are with everyone who is suffering right now in the Middle East and around the world, especially due to religion-driven conflict. Religion absolutely can cause a lot of trauma. And I'm so grateful that you were here to start us off at CORT 2023. Thank you,
Might as well
Dr.
start at the
McSkimming.
bottom of the world. Come and visit me, everybody.
Oh,
I've got an open door policy. Wouldn't that be lovely? Yeah.
Wow. In Australia, boy, you might have some takers there.
I should have done one of those poll questions about is anybody here Australian, but that's okay. They'll make themselves known.
That's right. Well, thank you again so much for joining us. It was a real treat to see you and talk to you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody. It's been great.